While is played... Hold on. No, I don't want to update to Windows 10.
It should be Windows 10. Why is it asking it on?
It is Windows 10. Welcome to the Thoughtful Gamer podcast, where we are going down my list of my favorite games of all time. We've done almost the entire top 50. We've gone from 50 to 11, and today we're doing the top 10, finally.
Woo!
That was really pathetic.
So sad.
Wow.
So sad.
It was only sad because Orion didn't cheer too.
At least we tried, Mark. At least we tried.
Sure, I'll give you that. With me today, as always, Orion.
Hello.
Matt.
Hey.
Special guest, Ben.
Hey.
And my lovely wife, Amber.
Hi, everyone.
Who have been me through this entire journey, good and bad, agreements and disagreements. And I don't think there'll be a ton of disagreements on this top 10. They've basically kind of figured it out already. What I had them do is after 40 through 31, so once we hit the top 30, I had them try to guess at what my top 10 was. So they each wrote down individually what they thought it was, and I think they all got 8 or 9 correct at this point. Is that right, guys?
Yep.
Presumably.
Yeah.
And I think some of the ones we missed were 11 or 12.
Yeah, I'm pretty predictable among these people, so maybe it wasn't quite as a challenging test as I had thought. What was the lowest one that someone predicted? Was it Pandemic Legacy?
I think it was viticulture.
Yeah, viticulture for me.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Was that in the 20s?
I think that was
It was in the 20s.
Okay.
Anyway, before we get into the much acclaimed top 10 games of all time, definitively, without argument,
With some argument.
According
with
to
probably some argument,
Until next year when you change the list.
until next year when I change the list. I don't know. So far, I don't know if there are any games that
I mean, Near
we've
and
gotten
Far
since. Near and Far is pretty good. It's not
be in the
top
top
10
50.
Is it
material.
top 20?
I mean, it's top 50.
It's Near and Far is top 50. I'd probably Venus, once we play it a couple more times, will probably appear there. What else? Labyrinth, maybe? Gotta play that a few more times. I think those are all the new games that...
Riftwalker would...
Oh, Riftwalker might make it. Yeah, I did a review of that. And gave that a decent score. That might squeak in there. I'm not sure. We'll see. We got a lot more games to play before a year
Rebellion
from now.
will make the top 10 next time. It's not even in my top 10. But I won't be happy until it's in your top 10.
It's not going to make the top 10. Before we get to the ultimate top 10, let's look at some games that barely missed the list. These were just out of the top 50. 51, it hurt me to leave this one out, but Kemet.
Oh,
Just barely missed it.
Okay.
It's a good game, but it fell a bit short.
Yeah.
What else we have on here? Libertalia, Dungeon
I
Lords.
hated both of those last two.
You hate Libertalia.
I don't think I even played that one.
You know, it's got that same... You said Libertalia and Dungeon Lords?
Yeah.
Specifically, those two have that element of you're trying to...
Oh, you're trying to guess what other people are going to do?
Yeah.
I love that.
Which that's great. But if you guess just wrong, you end up just getting the thing that you didn't want.
It's better... That aspect of it's, I think, better in Libertalia because the game could just get really wacky and really swingy. Dungeon Lords, if you guess really poorly, it just beat you down.
No. I've never had a problem with Dungeon Lords. I never try to guess whatever you guys are guessing. But since we operate on different wavelengths, I do just fine. It's great.
Anyway, they're good games. 55, I had Scrabble, which might surprise some people. I think it's a legitimately really good game. What else missed on here? 5 Tribes, Trajan, Star Realms, Blood Rage was up in the 60s.
Yeah. I mean, Kemet's better than Blood Rage.
Yeah.
We've still got to do Star Realms as a 3-player. That's something that I'm really curious. I think that'll make it a better game.
I'm not sure. Well, someone's got to buy another deck.
Yeah.
We have to buy another copy of it. So those are some of the games. Cosmic Encounter missed the list, but it was in the top 70.
Ooh.
But it's Shut Up and Sit Down's favorite game, Mark.
It is not. Pandemic Legacy is now their favorite game.
Oh, it booted it?
It's
Okay.
Tom Vassel's favorite game. I believe it is their second or third favorite.
Why?
They might have... I think on their latest iteration, they might have put Memoir at second. I can't remember.
All right. I've missed that.
I don't understand the Cosmic Encounter love. I think it's fine. It's okay, but I don't understand.
It may just be because I've never played it with fewer than like 6 people, but I have never enjoyed a game of Cosmic Encounter.
You know, Cosmic Encounter has that thing where, like, usually everyone finishes within a couple points of winning.
Well, it's only up to 5 points.
Yeah, but it's usually, like, I think it encourages, or just the way that...
Well,
Normally people are really close. I just want to say, last time I played it, I won, like, 5 to 1 to 1 to 1 to 2.
yeah, that was awful.
And I'm retiring. I'm never playing Cosmic Encounter.
Well, I mean, honestly, if you're playing Cosmic Encounter optimally, it should pretty much be a shared victory for all but one player.
No. No shared victories. No.
And we don't usually share victories, but if you're being very competitive about it, that's how the game's probably going to end.
It very much supports ganging up on the leader and letting the lower, ranked people catch up until
Yeah.
the very end when you're stuck. Or someone just has a crushing combo, but it's hard to put yourself in that situation when you're ahead.
Yeah, I've had a couple of games of Cosmic that were just really, really fun with the way the powers interacted, and then probably 70% of the time it was a bit of a dud. Anyway, enough about that. Let's talk about some better games.
Woo!
Some good games.
Top 10 games of all time, which I'm sure everyone here will agree with me on. Number 10.
Wait, should we guess?
Oh, do you want to guess? Sure, guess number 10.
I don't know.
Twilight Imperium. Twilight Imperium is my
No.
guess for number 10.
Boo.
I guess Castles of Burgundy.
Dominant Species.
Ryan got it right. Number 10
Boom!
is Castles of Burgundy by Stefan Feld. If you've been to the website, you've seen I wrote a strategy guide about this. I've played this game roughly 500 times online, and I'm still playing. I still have 20 games going right now online. And I just love this game. It's just so beautifully designed, where everything can be calculated in terms of your actions, and they're simple calculations, but they're still based on the die rolling. There's some randomness involved in adapting to your dice, and it doesn't look like much, but it's such a fun game. The basics of it is basically you're building up an estate in France, and each player has a different player board with a bunch of hexagons on them, and every turn you roll 2 dice, and those kind of give you options to what kind of tiles are available to you. You buy tiles, you put them on your estate, you get points for, like in any Stefan Feld game, for a variety of different things, and you just keep going through 5 rounds, which is 5 turns each, so 25 actions, and at the end of the game, you just count up how many points you've got based on how well you placed tiles strategically.
Yeah.
And it's just so elegant, and so, again, the phrase that comes to mind is just beautifully designed, that it has to be high in my list.
This one is one that I haven't played very much, certainly compared to you. And my biggest fault that I can find is that it just feels dry to me. And like I'm not opposed to just really dry strategy games, but this one never grabbed me. So it's not actually a criticism. It's just for some reason I didn't get the excitement that you got on this. But I feel like it's like the kind of game where I needed to play it like 5 more times, and then I would have been hooked.
I think for me, I kind of agree with Matt, but at the same time, I see Mark's side. I really, really appreciate it as a strategy game. I think you can go so deep on it, and there's always more to think about. But at the same time, I do, there's not a lot of interesting theming in it, which is fine. You don't need that. But I think the game might benefit from something a little more exotic or interesting. But having said that, it is a very good game.
I mean, that's always the criticism of the game, is that it looks boring, it's ugly.
Yeah.
To me...
Okay, the choice of yellow for the, like, special tiles is
yellow.
It's the worst imaginable yellow.
I disagree.
true.
I don't think the game looks that bad. It's that same kind of Carcassonne, Settlers, light green, blues and beige and tan and all that.
It's like this yellow with the worst hint of green.
I have to agree with Matt. The game looks good to me, except for those yellow tiles.
I don't think the game looks bad.
Yeah, and I should say, in general, I think it looks cool. I think the player maps you get look really cool. You have this hexagonal estate.
Yep.
And each one is different with kind of a different layout of the different colored regions, which represent the different types of things you can buy.
Yeah, and you put the mat in front of you, and it's completely empty, basically, and it's just full of possibilities and different strategies and ways you can go. And I think I talked about this in one of the lists where I was talking about Tokaido, is that I like games a lot that give you just a couple of options each turn. And then you just pick one of those good options and go with it. And this is one of those games because you roll dice to determine your options, and it just gives you a couple of viable options each turn.
Yeah.
But they're always interesting decisions. You don't have to think too hard. You don't have to think too much ahead of time. You just roll your dice, see what's available, and choose what you think the best option is, and go from there. And for me, that's such a relaxing, pleasant experience.
Orion, where's this game for you? Because I feel like this is more in your wheelhouse than it is in mine.
I like this game, but it doesn't feel as deep to me because each action is so simple, and on your turn, you'll have your 2 dice, which are basically your actions, and there's a number of things you can do, but there's usually like 1 or 2 options pretty much, and it doesn't feel as deep because you're not planning out a more elaborate strategy, and your individual actions are much simpler.
Yeah, and it's one of those games where you're not going to pull together some crazy strategy and pull ahead a lot.
But I love that because that's where I think I have an edge.
Yeah. It's a game where every advantage is just very incremental and on the margin.
Yeah,
and that's how you're going to win the game.
Right.
And I love those kinds of games. And that's why I love Castles of Burgundy.
I respect your decision.
I wouldn't put it in my top 10, but I don't have a problem with anyone liking this game. It's certainly good.
Moving on to number 9, a game that, while played on the margins, does have a lot of swingy, crazy strategy victories. Can anyone guess what it is?
Dominant Species.
Yeah, I was going to say that sounds like Dominant Species to me.
Maybe Dominion?
No.
But Dominant Species?
Maybe through...
It's definitely Dominant Species,
Yeah,
number
yeah.
9.
Nice.
From the very first time I opened up and read the rules and played this game, I loved it. I mentioned El Grande earlier in the one of the previous episodes. If you've played that game, it's very similar to El Grande. It's just meaner and longer and better. It's just so good. It's an area majority kind of game, but streamlined and tightened up and strategically like a knife fight in a phone booth in the best possible way. It has this prehistoric
and just fascinating because it's like it's not just an area control.
It's natural selection.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, like wannabe game designers out there, your theme is evolution. Make more evolution games. That's what we want.
That's Matt's rallying cry. So you're basically taking over a type of animal in prehistoric times, and there's an ice age coming, and you're trying to control areas of the board. The twist or the unique thing about it is that there are 2 ways to control areas. You can have the most species there, the most cubes there, like any other area majority game. And you can have dominance there, which means that your species are more suited to that particular habitat. And in the game, you need to have control of spaces in both areas to really succeed well. The problem is that everyone else is trying to do the same thing, and the ice can expand across the board, and it's just so mean and so fascinating. I love the way that it uses time as a mechanism, because there's kind of 2 rounds to the game. The first round, everyone's going around placing down action pawns on the different possible actions like you would in a worker placement game. And then once everyone has done that with all of their action pawns, you then resolve each of those actions in order. And so it's a very kind of logical, linear game. But as you're placing action pawns, you're looking at what other people are placing on and trying to guess what they're going to do with those actions and how that's going to affect you. And because they all resolve in a very specific order, something that happens before before one of your actions could completely nullify an action you placed before. And it's just this really fascinating puzzle in which everyone else's actions matter tremendously. And it's a mean game, and you can get really stomped out or surge really far ahead, but I think it's just brilliantly designed.
Right, so some of the actions are to remove those elements from the game, or you can compete against other people on your spaces and kill their cubes, their species forever. And so it's this back and forth, and it's this tension on multiple axes of, securing your position and trying to score points.
Another great thing about the game is that scoring points is actually another action to take. So if you take the scoring points action, you can score a hex, but it's something you're not, it's an action you're not using to build up in other places of the board or establish your position a bit better.
Though in that case, when you do score it, assuming that you have dominance there, you get one of the special cards, which does something on the order of an action.
Sure, yeah.
To your advantage.
I can't say enough great things about this game. If you don't like mean games, you're not going to like it, but otherwise it's amazing.
But even if you don't like mean games, this game allows you to suffer crushing defeats, but you always have the chance to come back. And so it's good in that way. Not many games actually do that, so it's a unique experience.
It's interesting in that way.
If it's in the first half or 2/3 of the game, you might have a chance to come back.
No. Remember when you took over my entire board, and then I adapted and flipped every single one of your dominance cubes?
Oh, that's true, yeah.
That was in the last few turns, and it was just fantastic.
As far as, games that do a particular thing, just head and shoulders above anything else, I think of, Scythe's player board. When I played that was a revolution. It's this player board is literally game-changing. The way that dominant species does the actions, as you said, it's like the first half of the round, it's a worker placement, but you're placing workers on the actions, and then you just go down the list. I think that is so good.
You can see everything that's going to happen.
Yeah, you can see the resource tiles that are involved in the different actions, but as that board fills up, you're just kind of watching what areas of the action track are left. I just love it. And then when you're done with it, then you actually go straight down and do all the actions. It's awesome.
Yeah, and because the game's so linear, it's actually surprisingly easy to learn and teach.
For a game that heavy.
For a game that's going to take 4 hours and give you a headache, it's surprisingly very straightforward to teach. In fact, you could almost give the player aid sheets, your species sheets, to someone and just have them read it, and they would know 80 to 90% of the game right there.
Yeah, I've only played this one once with you guys, or at all. And this is one of those games that you go into and you look at the board before learning any of it, and it seems like it's going to be very complicated. But I don't think once we started, I really had any major questions. I had a couple now how does this work again type of questions. But usually, if I had just looked at the player helps, I could have just figured it out myself. It's very, very good in that regard.
Yeah.
One of the things I love about this game is the way you can really craft your turn, because you have 4 or 5 action pawns to place, and you can set yourself up and think, well, the dominance or the scoring is usually contested early, so I want to get a pawn in there, and then in the early turns I want to adapt and get another element, and then I know I'm planning to speciate or add new places or add new cubes to the board on this element, so I'm going to preemptively grab the competition on those land types so that I can place in there and immediately compete against people. And you can set up because everything is going to resolve in a certain order, you can set up these kind of combo actions to reinforce each other. And you get to see what's available, and so you can more accurately predict what other people are going to do because everything is public knowledge.
Yeah.
At least this version of the game, the most recent printing of the game, I think looks beautiful too.
I love how it looks.
The wooden components are really cool. The cones that represent dominance,
yes.
I think are awesome.
Yeah.
I think the game has gotten some flack for being ugly before, but I think that's mainly towards previous printings of it.
I think the first 3 printings had the old style, and it doesn't look great. Yeah. And then the next, I think they're about to do the 6th printing, maybe? 5th or 6th. But the last couple have had this updated look to it, and I think it looks fantastic.
Yeah, I agree. Totally.
Really vibrant colors, but at the same time, it doesn't get overly busy or complex on the board. It's very distinct and vibrant and clear what's going on. All right, moving on to number 8, a game I've also probably played.
They gotta guess.
Dominion.
Many times.
Yeah, that was a giveaway.
Number 8 is Dominion.
I mean, this is the deck building game. Yeah. And there's no competition for that title. It's just the best.
A lot of people would disagree with you. I haven't played...
Really?
I disagree with those people.
I haven't played a ton of the other deck building games out there. I've played Star Realms. It's not as good. I think I played Ascension once online, and it wasn't as good. I haven't played Trains, which is supposed to improve on the formula, or... what's some of the other ones out there? There's a new one, Clank. That's a deck building
Clank,
game that it's like a deck building plus a dungeon crawl kind of thing.
Yeah.
But I can't imagine anything beating Dominion because it's just so elegant and so well done. The thing that gets me is that in my mind, obviously the entire deck building genre is pretty much due to Dominion. And the idea that you build your deck as you play the game, that's great. But to me, the most brilliant part of this game is the way they do victory points, in that the victory point cards actually slow down your deck. And it's just such a seamless, elegant way to provide a bit of a catch-up mechanism and add another layer to the game that all of the other, or most of the other deck building games I've played, either with cards or online, don't have that. And I don't know why they don't do that, because that's the best part of Dominion, is choosing when to start buying victory point cards, because it makes your deck worse.
Yeah, I think specifically for that reason, Mark, particularly for that reason, it is one of the most elegant games I've played. I might count that as the most elegantly designed game that I've ever played.
Maybe non-abstract, yeah.
Yeah, maybe non-abstract.
And Go is pretty hard to beat.
Yeah, sure. But the other side of it is it probably has the most replayability of any game, modern board game that I've ever played.
I mean, just through sheer numbers.
Yeah, but
they have, 9 expansions at this point?
Yeah, I think we're into 300 different Kingdom cards. And one game is a collection of 10 Kingdom cards. I think that, your random selection of Kingdom cards for a given game meaningfully affects how the game's played, how you make that decision of how do I score points, when do I score points. It's not, some games have good replayability, but it's just kind of like putting a different flavor on the same thing.
Oh, yeah.
With Dominion, you're getting a different, interesting setup that causes you to make different decisions every time.
Fundamentally different decisions, yeah.
There's a huge difference between games that have a lot of attack cards and a lot of extra action cards, and games when there are no extra action cards and you really have to limit yourself in what you buy. There's games where you have a lot of drawing power that seem to go by really fast, and you have these epically long turns, and games where there is no drawing power and you have to scrimp and save for what little cards you can get.
Big money games.
There's so many different flavors of the game, and each one is different in and of itself.
And then there are those games where you have the alternative victory point strategies that are just,
Oh, yeah, like with Gardens.
Yeah, Gardens or Tunnel.
And they introduced victory point chips in one of the expansions recently that takes away the victory point cards from your deck, where you can win the game if you even without any victory point cards in the deck, which maybe you don't
get. Yeah,
they're harder to get, but they may be more worth it in the long run.
But all the possibilities are out there, which is what makes Dominion a game that I will never say no to.
Yeah. Well, and another thing that a lot of other deck builders have done to deviate from Dominion is they give you kind of a random rotating selection of cards instead of the static, here are the 10 action cards we're playing with. And I think that's to their detriment. One of the coolest things about Dominion is that first couple of minutes where everyone's just looking at the kingdom cards and silently figuring out a strategy and seeing what kind of combinations they can come up with before the game actually begins. And I love that moment at the beginning of the game where everyone's doing that.
Yeah, some of this is nostalgia, but like that first 3 minutes of seeing a kingdom in Dominion is like one of my favorite feelings of board gaming. It's like that's when all of the kind of grand planning happens. And the game itself is interesting. I guess it's more tactical decisions for each hand. But just looking at that kingdom of 10 cards and saying, okay, what are all the possibilities of how I could attack this? It's one of my favorite things in board gaming.
And speaking about the expansions, I mean, we've been playing this game for, 8 years or so? 7-8 years?
Something like that.
They've been designing expansions every year for probably a decade at this point, and each one has been interesting with some new mechanics and fun and adds to the overall game. You might complain about alchemy a little bit, but
am I the only person who thinks alchemy is fantastic?
I love it.
I believe you are the only person.
No, I love it.
That's like universally acknowledged as the worst expansion.
Yeah, I think it's great. I think it's just a different way to play the game.
I mean, that's what all of them are. I think I like some of the newer ones.
So.
They've gotten a bit bloated, I think, the last couple.
That's a valid criticism.
I've enjoyed them.
Dark Ages was probably the hardest for me to take because, I mean, there are like 500 cards in that box.
Yeah. And so they lengthen the game a bit. I remember more fondly the kind of the sleeker versions, even with just Prosperity, which lengthens the game a hair. It's still a bit quicker than some of
Prosperity
these
makes it
later
more
ones.
of a boom because you spend more time buying these expensive cards, but they give you a massive power spike at the end of the game.
Yeah.
I think my favorite one was Cornucopia because it encourages you to buy like all of the cards. And
I really liked a lot of cards from Cornucopia.
Yeah, Cornucopia was I think maybe the most pleasant expansion.
Yeah, so if you want to know what this deck builder thing is, I absolutely still recommend Dominion.
Even just start with the base set, and you'll have
hundreds
of hours. Yeah, easy.
We should mention in my list of like fondest board gaming experiences, one summer Orion and I were interning together, and we shared an apartment, and we had like 4 of the expansions.
Yeah,
and we'd play like 2 or 3 times a week. We'd play a couple games.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was great.
And by the end of the summer, like we felt like we had this game. We were like absolute pros.
We got a lot better that summer, but you play a game 50 times over 3 months, and you're gonna get better at it.
But every time we played, it was fun because we were getting better, and we didn't run out of game space to enjoy.
Right, we didn't run out of unique combinations, and we didn't run out of fun, and we still enjoyed it.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of those games that will probably, of the games on my list, one of the most likely to still be played 100 years from now, and I think it's absolutely warranted. All right, moving on to number 7. Any guesses?
Star Wars Rebellion.
No, Matt. No.
Let's go with Space Alert.
That was what I was going to guess as well.
Twilight Imperium. I can't imagine Twilight Imperium is that much further up the list.
None of you got it right.
Is it Through the Ages?
It is Through the Ages at number 7.
Okay.
And I will clarify that this is technically the new version of the game that I'm putting this high, because it is I do love the original Through the Ages. The new one, which is called Through the Ages, A New Story of Civilization, rather than just A Story of Civilization, is it improves the game
it's
in
just
everything.
that much better. I mean, they took a great game and just fixed all the minor problems and
Just
made it
shaved
better.
off the rough edges and made it really good. And that's kind of the one I'm grading this high, just because I've played it and it's the best version of the game. But oh man, what a game. It gets better and better as I play it too. I remember the first time we played it at Vladicon, I think it was me, Matt, and Orion, right?
Yeah.
And we played it, and it's one of those games where if it's your first time, you're just gonna lose, and we did, or I did at least. I don't remember who won.
I'm pretty sure I won.
Did you win? Okay, well, if it's your first time and you're me,
well, only because it was the three of us. Someone taught us.
I thought Orion had played before.
Oh, I had played one game against Bubba, and got crushed. Obviously.
Yeah.
Bubba always wins.
But anyway, I played it, and I'm like, well, it's kind of interesting. It took 4 hours, and I wasn't quite sure. I kept getting beat down and felt like I couldn't do anything. But once you play it a couple of times and kind of start to understand the cards a bit better and understand how to use your resources and not draw too many cards that you're not going to be able to afford, it just becomes this amazing puzzle that is always changing. The game is literally like on a conveyor belt. It's a civilization game without a map. So all you're controlling is kind of your resource production and your technology and your army strength, but more on an abstract scale than like a civilization, like the computer game. And you don't miss the map when you're playing it, because the rest of the puzzle, using your resources and using your actions efficiently and getting leaders and everything, is just such an interesting aspect of the game. And how it works is that there's this row of cards available to you that you can spend your actions on to pull up into your hand and then later purchase them or use them. But after each turn, you take away a couple of cards and you slide everything down the row and you add more cards. So there's always this shifting tableau of cards to choose from. And it has so many interesting interactions between your different resource productions and the different technologies you can build, and this kind of Cold War game you have with the military, where if you let someone get too far ahead in the military, they can just completely wreck you, so you kind of have to keep up with them. And the way you can plant events into an event deck instead of just having a random event deck. The events are actually seeded by the players, but they don't resolve until later, and then the order in which they resolve are kind of random, so you could plant something that doesn't resolve until an hour, 30 minutes, or an hour later down the game, so you have to be very careful with that. There's just so many different cool mechanisms in this game that work so well together, it's hard to almost talk about.
I don't know if I really agree that this game is that cool.
I thought have you even played it?
Yeah, I played it a few times with you.
Okay.
And it was much better than I thought. And I do agree that a lot of the mechanisms are good and they allow for an enjoyable gameplay. But this game just looks so boring. It's like a history book that you don't want to open. And
it does. The original game does look very bad. The new one looks a bit better.
It's interesting, but maybe it's a little bit too abstract for my tastes.
Well, a favorite thing that you like doing in games is like sending your armies across the map to attack people, and this deliberately removes that part of a civilization game.
Yeah.
I think for me, this game, I will say that this is it's a hard game to play with people who are a lot better at it than you are, because you are going to get mercilessly wrecked every time.
Also true.
It has a very strange rhythm to it. Most games you're taking cards and you're playing them relatively quickly. In this one, you may draw a card into your hand that you don't intend to actually utilize for like 20 or 30 minutes. So you have to be thinking very long term, because it takes a long time to do much of anything. And so one of the things I had to learn through the first few plays was just take fewer cards, because I was always taking too many things that I couldn't afford. And then by the time I could afford them, it was, there was an age 1 card and an age 3 was happening. It wasn't worth it anyways. So you have to kind of get into the rhythm of the game through a couple of plays before you start understanding the strategy.
Right, and you can only play so many technology cards because you only have so much science to research them with. So you can grab all these great technologies, but you're only going to be able to play one every other turn unless you spend a bunch of time ramping up your science production, which obviously, there's opportunity cost to that.
Yeah, you could ramp up. Usually there's like 3 main resources. There's the ore, there's food, and there's science. And at best, I found you can increase like 2 of those a lot. Like one of them is going to suffer.
The other thing that changes is you play with the same deck of cards, combined technologies and action cards and military units and whatever else is all in there, and leaders and wonders all sliding by on this conveyor belt. And they come in these 3 different sets called ages, but you don't know, you shuffle up each age before you play it. So the second level iron or ore technology, iron might take till the very end of the age, or maybe the only one comes up early on and someone else grabs it and you're stuck with bronze until start of age 2 or something.
And there's also the government's changing. You probably want to switch your government type once during the game, but you might be planning on doing it at a certain time, but then that card never comes up. And then when it does come up, it may interrupt some of your other plans, and there's a lot of adapting you have to do and make extremely difficult decisions.
Yep.
But your decision now, Vladicon was the first and last time I ever played this game. But your decisions on a turn are pretty much limited to which of those cards on the moving conveyor belt am I going to take. Is that right?
Yeah, kind of.
You also,
and which cards you want to play from your hand.
Right.
Then your other actions are increasing your population and building the different buildings, civic buildings or whatever, or playing technologies.
Okay. There's quite a bit of flexibility on your turn. Not necessarily a lot given your resources, but in theory, you could have a lot of options.
Okay. Your standard turn will probably look something like take 1 or 2 cards, play 1 card, and do 2 worker things, roughly.
Yeah.
One thing I will say about this game that I kind of like is that you can't always do the strategy that you want to, because a lot of times you're going to miss cards that you need. And you have to be very flexible in like always having a backup plan. And I like the fact that you can't go into this game and say, okay, well, this is what I'm going to do, and then you just execute and do it. You have to be really agile and willing to completely change everything that you're going to do, especially early game with those leaders.
You can have kind of a general strategy of like, I want to go strong military this game, but you won't know if you can actually execute that until you play through the turns. And some of your choices of leaders and wonders, since those are the unique cards you'll take, will determine what path will be more effective to you. So maybe you get a Shakespeare and your theaters are extra productive and you want to go down that route, but you're behind on military, so you have to weigh, do I go all in on this culture to score victory points and run the risk of being behind on military, or do I spend less effective actions doing that because I'd missed a technology but I have to try to catch up, or back and forth, and you have to kind of remake that decision every turn.
Yeah, it's both at once very strategic and very tactical, and I think the flow of the game where you're planning for things very far down the road, you can't do everything you want to do, it really feels epic in a sense that you're planning these very long-term constructions and changes to your civilization, but time is passing by and other civilizations are passing you in different areas and you have to watch out for them. It feels, to me at least, like you can feel the passage of time in that, you're going through hundreds of years thematically as you play the game, even though it's very tight and very crunchy and very puzzle-like.
I like how you see kind of the advancement of the different areas. So you start with swordsmen, and then you get, warriors or whatever, and then you get pikemen, and then you get gunmen, and then
if you get a pleasure out of the kind of Age of Empires feel of upgrading your stuff, you're going to enjoy the thematic element of the game.
Yeah. It's a fantastic game. Although, again, the new version is just spectacular. The art is a lot better, and it doesn't change a lot, but what it does change is exactly correct, is how I would describe it. It balances a couple of the cards a bit better. It makes the military not quite as severely damaging to the person behind, and just does a couple of other little small balance changes.
Just really little things about changing when you have to discard makes the flow
it makes
so much
the
better.
flow, the turn order make more sense. Yeah, little things like that. So definitely get the new Story of Civilization. But if you happen upon the original game, it's still brilliant.
Yep.
All right. Any guesses on number 6?
Twilight Imperium.
It's not Twilight Imperium.
Let's see. So we've already done
Resistance.
That's possible.
But it would be wrong.
I would go with Mage Knight, I think.
No, it is a Vlada game.
Space Alert.
Oh,
Space
yeah.
Alert.
Space Alert!
Space Alert is a real-time game. I do have to clarify, our favorite designer is Vlada Kvatal, and he designed Through the Ages, the last one. He also designed this one, Space Alert.
But they're so different.
But they're very, very different. And whereas Through the Ages is a 4-hour-long, thinky civilization game that looks kind of dull, Space Alert is a 30-minute long real-time game set in a zany spaceship. And it is the only game, I think, that has inspired me to give a motivational speech to the table. It's a real-time cooperative game where you're all in a spaceship, and in a 10 to 15 minute track, the recording will send different spaceships, enemies at you, and you have to coordinate and negotiate and plan out, program out your actions to try to defeat the enemies and stay alive and not blow up. And then at the end of those 15 minutes, you all reveal your actions, and you go through, one by one, everyone's actions and how different things progress, and you see how well you've succeeded or most likely failed to succeed and instead got blown up. It's an amazing time. It's just so fun in that 15 minutes to try to, divide the labor and have different people focusing on different specializations, but then coordinating with each other. You have things where, like, 2 people can't go up and down the elevator on a certain deck at any given action moment, or else they get delayed, which screws everything up. So you have to coordinate things like that. You have to coordinate when you're firing shots and when you're charging energy and moving energy and power around the spaceship. And some people have to deal with actually figuring out what the enemies are and how fast they're going to be moving towards you, and what kind of shots from the spaceships. Are they immune to missiles? Do they need to be hit by something else, etc., etc.? And it's just such an engrossing 15 minutes, followed by slowly building celebration or disappointment.
Hilarious, agonizing playing out what you did.
Agonizing is a good word, but the good kind of agonizing.
Yeah. The kind of agonizing that you do together based on
it's
your
a
own
cooperative thing.
Yeah.
Your own.
There's the joy of when everything works exactly as planned, and the horror of finding a card that you do not remember putting down.
We've spontaneously jumped up and high-fived each other at when a particular play went off well. We don't do that kind of thing.
No, we are very reserved, reasonable people.
We're stoic.
And Space Alert is the best teamwork game I think I've ever played.
Well, it has to be. I mean, so quarterbacking is the biggest challenge in a cooperative game. Space Alert just
destroys that
completely
problem.
bypasses that problem, because in this real-time setting, you cannot do everything by yourself.
There's just too much information and not enough time. So
you have to work together.
You have to, and you have to trust each other. The biggest thing is that when you hand off something, you're like, okay, maybe you're controlling the ships and you pull out a ship and you're like, okay, it needs to be hit twice by this laser, and someone says, I got it. You have to trust that they've got it and not ask again, because there's just not enough time. And that makes the game great. It's just such a teamwork experience in the best possible way, and you get so riled up about it. Even now I'm excited just talking about it, because it's such an exciting game.
I think all of us have had games where we were the weak link.
Oh, we're the one that made the mistake.
Yeah, made the mistake of just like predicting or calculating one fewer damage than necessary to an asteroid coming
chain
in.
Of events,
a chain reaction.
Right. So you don't quite finish off this ship, so your next shot misses the one behind it, and that hits you and knocks out a player.
Or you use the wrong elevator, which delayed someone else who was doing something extremely critical.
Right, and then you forget to move the mouse, and everyone's delayed, and you run out of energy, and...
That's another thing. The game's really funny.
Oh, it's hysterical. It is the funniest rulebook I've ever read.
Yeah, the rulebook's so funny. It actually has a tutorial where it introduces new elements to you, but the writing in it's like top-notch comedy. One of the best things about the game is that each round in the 3 rounds of the game, someone has to go over to the computer that runs the entire spaceship and like hit the space bars so the screensaver doesn't turn on. And if you don't do that, everyone gets delayed.
Because your corporate sponsors require the screensaver to be enabled so that their logo can be projected.
Is that the reason?
Yeah, it is. It is.
And then the thing that we always go for is visual confirmation, where when one of the decks, one of the actions is that you can look out the window and do visual confirmation. But
because ostensibly you're on a science mission.
Yes. And it's better if you visually confirm things to see if they are there. But the more people who do that at once, the more points you get. So you get very tempted to all meet up periodically and look out the window together and not, like, fight the aliens that have just boarded.
I am more emotionally connected to looking out the window in Space Alert than any other thing in any board game.
We are so emotionally connected that in the expansion that comes with Space Alert, there is a card that lets you look out the window for 2 people.
Better.
And I took it as my first upgrade. That was what I took.
Oh, I forgot to mention, this game has one of the best expansions ever made.
Yeah, it's really good.
It's a really good expansion. It makes the game incredibly more difficult if you want it to be. I think we're pretty good at Space Alert. And we have like a 30% success rate at medium difficulty with the expansion.
It's because of you dirty clones, I'm telling you.
50%.
Not on medium. We keep going back to easy to get some wins.
Oh my goodness.
I know. But on top of that, not only does it increase the difficulty, it gives double action cards. So normally when you're programming, you do one thing each turn. And then with this new version, you can have double actions. So the cards will have a single action on one side and a double on the other, so you can be more efficient, which helps you with the tougher enemies, but also makes everything much more convoluted. But the very best thing is that it adds this kind of campaign system into it where you have a character and you can level them up and get extra skills and get achievements. There's a whole book of achievements you can accomplish and get special actions and unique attributes and stuff. And that part of the game is just a blast.
One thing about the expansion I'll say is it's perfect in that you play the base game for a while and you need to play the base game for a while.
Oh, you cannot jump into the expansion.
But at a certain point, you're like, this game is still amazing, but we're ready to do something more with it. And the expansion is exactly what you want.
I think there was a time when we only had the base game, when we had
for
close
like
to
a year.
100% success rate.
Well, yeah, and exactly when we thought the game was getting a little easy, we got the expansion, and it has not been easy since.
But I think there are games out there that we feel like you play the base game once or twice, and then it's just better with the expansion. This game, the expansion comes just when you want it, after you've enjoyed the base game for a while.
I think my favorite thing about the expansion is the character sheets, where you can build and grow a character who will, if you choose to be cloned or not, hilarious. Which I resisted for a long time.
And then you thought better of it finally. Joined the ranks of the cloned ones.
I gave in because you guys are so bad that we kept losing and I kept dying.
Yeah, I blame all of you clones for our losses. Every time.
So on the character sheets, there is a box that you can mark at the top that says, I consent to be cloned. And that means that if you lose a game, your intelligence is then uploaded to a new body, a new clone body, and you can continue your character.
You
Otherwise,
you don't even know that you were in a tragic spaceship accident.
You just have better skills. If you do not check that box, like certain people here, every time you lose the game, you have to start a new character.
Another great thing about the game is it has one of the better mechanisms for controlling difficulty, because each of the kind of threat decks, there are 3 different difficulties: white, yellow, red. So you can
for each of those 4 categories of enemies.
So you can control the difficulty of a given game just by shuffling different sets of those difficulty decks together.
Right, and then there's
which
also
is really great.
Different tracks you can play, which are more or less difficult.
Yeah, just all around an amazing game. I think the only reason it's at number 6 and not like at number 1 is that semi-frequently I'm just not emotionally in the mood for the high stress, highs and lows of this game.
After each mission, you can have victory shots or consolation shots.
Exactly.
Oh yeah, maybe that's why we like it.
That might be the alcohol.
The
might
clincher.
Be one reason.
That's not in the rules. House rules.
That's the thoughtful gamer house rule to Space Alert. After each game, if you win, have a victory shot. If you lose, have a consolation shot.
Maybe that's why we're so bad at this game.
That could be.
That's why we get worse the more times we play it in a night. We usually win the first game and lose the second game.
This is true. Oh, man. Okay, let's move down to number 5. Any guesses here? It's not Twilight Imperium. Matt.
Is this on it? Surely. Okay.
Netrunner?
Is not Netrunner.
Is Resistance this
Mage
high?
Knight. Through the age. Or Resistance.
It is indeed the Resistance.
All right.
Number 5. Best game of all time. Resistance or Avalon, either one. And we haven't played it for a while. We kind of burned out of it a bit. Or at least I burned out of it a bit. But man, some of the best gaming memories of my life. I've played probably 100 times, and what a blast. Like, such a perfectly, again, elegant, beautifully designed social deduction game. There have been people who have done more with the concept and added to the concept in different types of social deduction games. They're kind of a popular genre, but none that I've played have come close to just the pure elegance of the Resistance and how just perfectly designed it is.
Yeah. This is definitely in contention for my number 1 game, if I put the time in to make a list. And the biggest criticism I have of this game is if you play it with the exact same group of people 100 times, you'll probably burn out.
And then you don't want to play with people who haven't played as much or who aren't that group, because a metagame develops.
I feel like Frodo coming back to the Shire about this game. It's like I've experienced something that I can never quite be the same. How I was now that I've played Resistance 150 times.
This is my favorite type of game, where you have some people who have a secret role. Like we talked about this a little bit with Battlestar Galactica, and I just really love the social manipulation and the deception that's involved with this. I will say I don't think I'm very good at figuring out when people are lying, but I really love the process of trying to do that, and I really love the process of trying to deceive other people when you are that spy who's trying to make everyone fail. I think it's such a great game. The first game I played like this was Mafia, and this is head and shoulders above
not a
Mafia.
good game. Or Werewolf is it sometimes called.
Yeah, so I came into Resistance with that as my experience, which I really loved Mafia, and I've played Mafia probably almost as much as I played Resistance, which is a lot. And I love Resistance will probably for a very, very long time be my number 1 game.
Yeah, I'm surprised Matt, you didn't say it's absolutely your number 1. Is it between Resistance and Dominion for you?
Yeah, Resistance, Dominion, and maybe Codenames.
Oh, and Codenames, yeah. Those would be your top 3.
Those are probably the ones in contention, yeah.
Yeah, Resistance, it's just so pure. And I think some complaints I've seen about the game is that it's too simplistic and it doesn't give you enough information. But once you've played a few times and you start to understand the psychology behind it, there's a lot of information given away just by voting patterns and just very little things, not like reading people, but actual concrete decisions that people make.
I think a lot of that really comes down to the group you play with, because people play completely differently, and the way we play will be totally different from another group. So we've played a bunch of times, but we could go play with a different group and take completely wrong cues based on how they're playing.
Sure, but that's part of the fun too, is understanding how the group is thinking about the game and how their metagame.
This game has one of the strongest metagames of any game I played. It's almost the legacy game before legacy games were a thing.
Except that the game itself doesn't change, just the people's perception of it does.
Yeah, exactly. The metagame is that strong. It is. I played 50 plus games with you guys probably.
Yeah.
And probably 40 plus games with coworkers at one point. And the metagames were completely different.
I mean, you and I still have arguments, or have not resolved arguments that we've had for years about the importance of certain things in the game.
Right.
The first mission.
Yes. If you haven't played The Resistance, it's just the perfect social deduction game.
The thing with this game is that I think it's less about playing the game and more about playing the people. And the game it sets up situations for you where you're going back and forth and discussing with the people you're playing with, and that's really where the magic of it is.
I would say it's the perfect balance of playing the game and playing the people. I think what makes it stand out as an elegant game is that it distills this actual deduction about what's happened and ability to read people and understand what people are doing and saying and what that means. And those two aspects are just fundamentally balanced in the game. Makes it a game that you can play over and over again and have a great experience with.
Yeah.
One of the coolest things that you'll encounter after you've played this game a dozen times is that someone will figure out how to act in a situation that's new and unique, and it will shift your metagame. And I know I've done this a couple times with how to play the spy in different situations, and one of the things I really loved is trying to figure out how to make the counterintuitive thing work. We had kind of an established logic of the spy should vote like this and the resistance should vote like this, and then I love asking, well, what if I do the opposite in this situation, and how do I argue that and deceive people and switch things up to get an advantage? And those are some of just the most amazing memories for me of being like, I have completely, fooled people because I took this radical new approach to a certain situation, and just everyone is on the wrong track. And that's beautiful.
Stepping back from our kind of storied experience of this game, I do enjoy playing the game with new people and teaching. This is one of my favorite games to teach to people. If I can convince them that sitting around a table and lying to each other for an hour and a half is worthwhile.
We have some friends who just cannot handle that we're sitting there lying to each other with straight faces.
Those are my favorite friends to teach the game to. Yeah, but I also enjoy stepping into those kind of new metas or fresh metas where people haven't played the game and learning for the first time. And it's harder to know exactly what's going on if there are new players involved, because people are experiencing for the first time and deciding what's the right thing to do in different situations for the first time. But I think that's still enjoyable. And then, the second and third game with that group of people is just great.
Yeah. Yeah. The way to introduce someone to the Resistance is how it was introduced to me. In college, one of the professors who was on a debate trip with us knocks on our hotel room door. We're all hanging out watching TV, and he's a very stoic, kind of reserved guy, and looks at us and says, "Does anyone want to play a game of cunning and deceit?" And we all look at him, because this has never happened to us before, where he's even interacted with us in the evenings. Everyone just kind of goes to their room and goes to sleep. And we're like, sure. we had no idea what was coming next, but it was the Resistance, and we had an amazing time. And I just fell in love with the game. Yeah, and just another quick thing to point out is that we as a group got so into Resistance that we actually went out and purchased some broken full metal body airsoft pistols that look like real guns to use in the game as props. And it makes it, we always dim the lights. There's a certain creepy movie soundtrack we play.
Oh.
It's the girl with the dragon tattoo American version
Trent Reznor
soundtrack. So if you want the full Resistance experience, purchase some broken full metal body airsoft guns.
Sit in a room with a single light
source
swinging from a long chain.
And listen to the American Girl with the Dragon Tattoo soundtrack, and you'll have the full experience of this game.
Yep.
Or just come over here and we'll play it with you. All right, moving down, number 4. Any guesses now?
I guess Quiet Imperium.
I gotta go Mage Knight.
Matthew?
I've been saying TI3. I'm going to stay with it.
It's not. It's Netrunner.
Okay. I said that last time.
This is the living card game from Fantasy Flight that Orion and I have fallen deep into.
Yep.
But no one else. We haven't managed to drag anyone else in with us. In fact, we're going to a tournament. I guess by the time this it'll be this upcoming weekend.
Yep, this coming Saturday.
We're going to regionals. The first regionals we've been to. Mm-hmm. We've done some local store championships, but I assume regionals will be very similar. And oh man, what a game! I put a review on the website, but I just adore this game. It's an asymmetric 2-player card game, like something like Magic the Gathering, except instead of fighting each other and trying to wear down each other's hit points, one side is the runner, one side is the corporation, and all of the victory points in the game are inside the corporation's deck. And the runner is trying to infiltrate their servers and draw cards from their hand or from their deck or from servers that they're putting out on the board and trying to steal those agendas, whereas the corporation needs to put these agendas face down on the board in outside servers, protect them with ice, which is basically firewalls, and then try to advance those agendas. And it creates this magnificent economic game and trying to balance your tempo against the other player, but also has a bunch of bluffing elements that you don't see elsewhere. It avoids a lot of the kind of runaway victory problems that a lot of collectible card games have. It has just fascinating strategies and different decks. For a little while there, the meta was kind of bad due to a couple of extremely high-powered cards that were released, but it has since been fixed through some changes. And right now, the meta is just in a spectacular place where there are so many viable decks on either side that are doing well, and people are experimenting. And I cannot wait to go in and play this competitively again. It works both on a casual level and a competitive level, and it's just such a fascinating puzzle to construct your deck and try to adapt and work in the bluffing and kind of the efficiency engine of how you're going to get into servers or how you're going to protect servers, that I can't imagine another collectible card game like this ever surpassing it. Like, it's just so beautifully designed. The only way it's going to hurt itself is if we have meta problems like we did a few months ago with really poorly designed cards.
But it's so big. This game is just it's unapproachable. It's just too big.
That is absolutely not true. Partially because very soon they're actually going to rotate out the first couple of packs of cards. And so now, basically,
in a couple months, they'll rotate out the first 12 packs of cards.
Yeah, the first 12 packs of cards. So right now, where it is right now, is the biggest card pool that the game will ever have.
That's actually really good to know. Maybe, just maybe, you will convince me to play it yet.
And so that's going to shake up the meta completely. So I think as it stands right now, to get kind of every card in the game or very, very close to it, you need, at retail, you need to spend like $550 to $600 if I remember right.
It's expensive to buy into all the cards.
Which is expensive, but if you just look for deals like I did and go on like eBay and Amazon and stuff and get like sets used and find sales, I was able to buy in
stuff at 20% off.
I was able to buy in all the cards for like $200 to $250, I think. Just from scouting out deals over a month. So it's not horribly prohibitive for this kind of game.
Yeah, so those of us who don't ever plan on playing competitively, what do you need to start enjoying it?
One core set.
So that's it. And I mean, you can get that for what, $30, $40?
You can get that for $30, probably on cool stuff. It might retail for $40.
Yeah.
And that's all you need.
Yeah.
And then once you do that, Ryan and I actually had a podcast about this. There are a couple of other sets that are very easy next steps to get after you buy the core set. And the best thing about Netrunner is that unlike games like Magic the Gathering, you don't have booster packs where you're buying randomized packs of cards. When you buy a pack of Netrunner cards, you know exactly which cards you're getting. And everyone gets the same cards in those packs.
And those packs will have 3 copies of each card, which is the max you can legally put in a deck.
Yeah, they have full sets of every card. And basically, they'll release maybe 10 packs a year.
Something like that.
Each pack is $15 retail, so it's almost like a subscription service to like, Netflix or HBO or something. But it's a card game, and you just pay monthly, basically, to keep up with all the cards if you want to play competitively. But playing casually is just so easy with the core set. You get some interesting decks. Yeah, you can throw together. Once you're done with that, you can just expand it very gradually in a very easy and predictable way with just buying another one of these deluxe expansions.
Yep. If you go on the Netrunner subreddit, they have some recommendations they have a buying guide there for some recommendations and descriptions of a bunch of the packs.
Yeah, so it's not intimidating at all. But man, how thematic is this game, Orion?
It's incredible. It's the cyberpunk a la Neuromancer style, and I don't know, it's incredible.
Not only from I have a written review of this, so I'm not going to talk about it too much. But not only just from a mechanical standpoint, but from a thematic standpoint, where you feel like you're trying to hack in. And the way hacking works in this universe is that like you hack like your entire consciousness into the network. It's
right.
very
you kind of enter the cyberspace with your mind essentially. And so you're jacked in to the cyberspace.
And so you can actually take physical damage by certain traps.
Right. If you die in the Matrix, you die in real life.
Yeah, that's how it is. So it has this element of danger to it and risk analysis and risk assessment and calculating odds and calculating probabilities that I just love. It's not a game where you're going to sit there and puzzle out your win. At the very least, there's always some kind of uncertainty.
And the decks you play will vary wildly, so you'll play some that are extremely aggressive and you're constantly making runs, and you play some hacker runners where you're sitting back and building up your hacking rig to be able to handle any difficulty. And there's some corps that are trying to rush out, there's some corps that are trying to just flat out kill the runner and flatline them, there's other corps that are comboing things out. There's so many variations of strategy, both at a high level, but then also within each faction, because they all have their own kind of color pie of features or abilities that they're specifically good at.
Yeah, and one final thing I'll mention is that we talked about how it's great as a casual game just to play with you and a friend or you and your significant other or something like that. But if you are interested in doing Netrunner competitively, as we talked about, the price isn't that bad compared to games like Magic, but the community in Netrunner has been so friendly and so nice and so welcoming, and the people, especially at the high level, like the people who win tournaments, really genuinely want to grow the community and have it be a great, have really friendly, nice tournaments where new people are welcomed and you teach other people and you help them out, and it's just very welcoming. That's been our experience.
That's been part of the community, and there's a lot of people who really appreciate that and make every effort to maintain that going forward.
Yeah, so such a brilliant game.
If you want to learn more about it, there's lots of great podcasts. You can check out StimHack, which is a great website with a lot of useful articles. There's a Slack channel where there's people constantly talking about it. So there's all sorts of ways to get involved and get more into Netrunner.
All right, moving down to number 3. Matt, do you know what this one is?
TI3.
It is indeed Twilight Imperium.
I'm surprised
third
it's
edition.
this high, but
I love TI.
This game is incredibly epic. I'm not disappointed.
It is Amber's favorite game.
If you
Yes,
were to
it
describe
is.
this game in one word, which it's far too big to do that, but the word is epic.
That was actually
Yes.
the subtitle on my written review of this. Was just epic. It's a space opera in board game form. That's what it is.
It has everything. This game is everything.
It's a 4X game that, again, has everything you would want it to have. It has plastic spaceships and warring alien factions. It has exploration. It has politics. It has negotiation. It has trade. It has economic systems. It has combat systems. It has
war.
It has war system. It has war suns.
War suns, large triangular spaceships.
Very, very Star Wars-esque in some areas. And it takes about 8 to 10 hours, and it's one of my favorite games to play every time, even though it takes all day long. Like I talked about this in my review. It needs to take all day long to be this good, because that's part of the experience. Is that it's so big and so long, and you're referencing, you're trying to convince someone that someone else is the threat, and referencing things that happened hours ago.
Yeah.
It's just a big box, and literally a very big box full of fun.
I don't even mind that it takes too long as well, because this is one of the very few games where I can sit down at the table and the time feels as though it's passing in the game as it should, and I don't feel time passing outside of the game. It's a very immersive experience, and I feel like playing for 8 to 10 hours doesn't matter in the real world, and it's just the perfect amount of time for the game that allows everything to happen.
TI Day is an event.
Oh, yeah.
It's an experience. Like, you just set aside all day Saturday, and you take breaks for food or whatever, and it's just, it's amazing.
I think something that you've commented on, Amber, is that this is your favorite game. I think the first time I asked you why it was your favorite game, it says because it gives you a lot of freedom to do whatever you want.
Yeah, and not only can you do whatever you want, but the choices are all fun and they're all good. And it is like playing in a different world where you have endless choices. You can create the world that you want to create. Of course, there's pushback from other players, and so you're creating this world together. But like I said, it's a very immersive experience, and that's completely unique from what I found in other games.
In regards to just like having so much to do, like there's so many things you could do, and so many options that feel good on every turn, both on the big strategy scale and like what am I going to do with this particular move. The game's like, isn't it like Ameritrash taken to the logical conclusion in glorious form?
Well, in the sense that it's big and long, it has lots of minis and dice rolling, yes, but it also borrows a bunch of different Euro mechanisms.
Okay.
Yeah.
If you read, like, there's a little design note in the rulebook. A main part of the game, the designer took straight up from Puerto Rico, which is about as dry of a Euro game as you can get. But it's a fantastic mechanism and inspired this particular edition. I believe the first 2 editions of the game did not do strategy cards that way, but this edition did, and it makes the game better. But it has a lot of little Euro elements, but at its core, it's a big Ameritrashy game in the best way possible.
Yeah. As you kind of create your empire, over the hours that you're going to play this game, you just get the epic sense of galactic conquest or galactic, what would you call it? Like peaceful exploration. Maybe there's like a turtle race that is very trade centric.
Well, even with a lot of warring factions, like at its core, it's a game of diplomacy. It's a game of negotiation. Right. There is going to be war, but there's going to be a much bigger Cold War before that usually.
Yeah, and the Cold War is satisfying, and then the actual war is satisfying.
I mean,
pretty much nothing bad to say.
You have time to become enemies with someone, become infuriated at how they backstabbed you, attack someone else, become allies with your first person, and then backstab them again.
Yeah, it gives you time to experience those big narrative events and interpersonal events that you would not experience with shorter games.
Yeah. I mean, almost in a diplomacy sense, except that this game is giving you a grand space opera feel, whereas diplomacy is only the diplomacy.
This gives you a lot of other things to work with.
Yeah, the fighting is one of the most fun and important parts, and you get to stack all the little minis on top of your carriers,
which are great.
Yeah, it's very satisfying to have a battle in this game.
It also just looking at it is amazing because it covers the entire table, and you can see like your color ships covering one whole area of the galaxy, and you can look and be like, oh wow, Marc has a ton of stuff. He looks scary, and maybe he chose an aggressive red color that just looks intimidating, or you can maybe choose like the dark blue to try to blend into the background so no one notices.
Into the background of space.
Right.
I think I did that once as a strategic choice.
But those sorts of things actually happen in this game, and that adds to how amazing it is.
I have not found or heard of a game that is epic in this way that does it this well, and I would love for a game to surpass it, but it'd be a big task.
I think some of the really high or deep war games, would go beyond this, but that's a whole nother animal.
I don't know if they give the same feeling. They
Right.
certainly would be more deep and more complex and more strategically rich.
Okay.
There's something about
fun.
this
My
game.
favorite test for a game, is it fun when you lose? This game is an incredible experience no matter what, even though it's going to take you 8 hours.
And even though you may be out of it halfway through.
Yeah.
Essentially out of it.
Essentially out of it.
Technically, you could be completely removed from the game, but that's
The
never
way
happened
that the
to us.
victory points go, it doesn't... You never feel like you're completely out of it. If you can weasel some big diplomatic moves, maybe you're going to get back into it. But yeah, even when you're in that like behind feeling for most of the game, it's an enjoyable experience.
Yeah. Just brilliant.
We should also note that this has probably the best expansion we've ever played with.
Yes. The Shattered Empire expansion is the best expansion I've ever seen. Second place is the Space Alert one we talked about before. But this expansion not only fixes a couple of minor issues with the base game, but adds like 20 new modules you can plug and play into the game, and a bunch of them are really fun.
Right, we use about half of them usually, and they just add more layers and modules and stuff and systems to an already epic game.
Yeah. All right, moving on to number 2. Everyone knows what my number 1 is, so there's no sense in guessing this, but my number 2, the last Vlada Kvatal game on the list, our favorite game designer, his Triumph.
Mage Knight.
Meh.
Which Matt does not... Well, Matt, you played what? Once?
No, I've played 3 times.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
And you don't like it that much?
It's my least favorite Vlada game, other than Bunny Bunny Moose Moose, which is a good time for the first 20 minutes that you play it, and then you're done with it.
Yeah. This will be a podcast in the future where we have Matt play Mage Knight.
Look,
again.
I'm going to say some things right now, and then I'm going to check out for a little bit. I don't understand what the appeal of this game. It's kind of cool, but it's way too clunky for what it is. That's basically what my feeling is. But
I'll
you
tell
love
you,
it.
Matt.
You love it, so you go ahead and convince me.
I'll tell you the appeal of this game. The appeal of this game is that you're a crazy Mage Knight renegade going throughout the countryside.
Who sold your soul to the void.
Yes, to the mysteriously unaligned The Void.
I think it's the Council of the Void, maybe?
Council of the Void? I don't know. It's one of those things where you read it and you're like, well, clearly they're the bad guys, but they leave it ambiguous in the text of like the flavor text. Anyway, you're a Mage Knight, which is basically a medieval badass, fantasy world. And you're going throughout the countryside and just leaving destruction in your wake as you go fight a city. I don't know. The story isn't that compelling, but it doesn't matter. Here's what the game is. It's a deck builder a very, very slow deck builder.
It's like an adventure card game deck builder.
You have a hand of cards, and the cards will say, like, move 2, or attack 1, or influence 2. But then they have these extra bonus powers if you spend magic on them. And you draw your hand of cards, and you look at that hand of cards, and you look at your position on the map, and there are orcs around you, and towns, and citadels, and mage towers.
Dungeons and things.
Cathedrals and dungeons and holes in the ground. And you look, and there's a whole map of possibilities, and you look at your hand, and you're like, okay, hand, what are you going to let me do this turn? What is the puzzle that I can unlock here? And you look, and you figure, and you try a couple of different things in your head, and then finally something clicks. You're like, oh, I can use this card to move here, and this card to move here, and spend that mana crystal to fight this orc, and then I have these 2 cards, which just barely let me, if I spend this 1 crystal, block the orc, and then attack it and kill it. And then you're like, yes, I am awesome, I figured this out. And then you do that the entire game.
And then you do that 20 more times.
Matt's face right now is not convinced.
I'm just like, all of these things aren't that interesting. Like, I don't care about the card that says you can move 1 space or you have 1 crystal.
But then as you go, you get more powerful cards and your deck becomes better, and then you fight more powerful enemies and you're leveling up, and you can hire people to fight alongside you, and you get different spells, and there's this whole day-night cycle thing where spells are more powerful at night.
And then at the end, you fight this obscenely large army.
And then you fight a huge army, and then you get points. And we play it as a cooperative game. I've never actually played it as a competitive game. As a solo game or as a 2-player cooperative game, it's just so much fun to get immersed in this world, fighting, the different enemies out there, and trying to plan very strategically your path. So here's what I'll say, Matt, since I'm trying to convince you in this setup we've established. Like in Descent, you have ostensibly it's this like strategic this tactical movement game of like economizing your actions, but not really, because there's a bunch of dice and the movement rules are really weird.
Okay, if we're starting with Descent, we're not off to a good start, but...
No, I'm saying,
okay,
how that is?
I get it.
Mage Knight's like that if they made it actually an interesting movement tactical puzzle. But on top of that, it's a deck builder, which is awesome. And you know how in Dominion, it's a mostly strategic game, and once you have a hand of cards, sometimes, or a lot of the time, they kind of just play out themselves, and you don't make a whole lot of decisions? It's a deck builder where every single card you play is a precious resource, and you have to use it the best way possible. And thus, it is both a strategic and building your deck game, but also incredibly tactical, because there are multiple paths you can take with each given hand of cards.
There's maybe an interesting conversation about what makes deck building interesting, because maybe we have some disagreements there. I don't know. Maybe we should save this for the future podcast.
Yeah,
because I just look at all the elements of this game, and I think like this should be so cool. Like the map looks awesome. The deck building is potentially interesting. I just look at all these different aspects, and then none of them lived up to my expectations. Unlike like Twilight Imperium, you look at and it's like, wow, this has so much potential, and then it's like 10 times what you expect.
Well, the difference
none of the different parts add up for me in this game.
Well, you have to take it for what it is. It's not an epic game like Twilight Imperium where you're kind of given a bunch of freedom and you can do all sorts of different things. It's a game that looks like that, but instead has this very deep kind of economizing and puzzling out your actions at every step of the way. So it's a very tightly constructed game.
Okay. All right. I'm not going to bring up any more criticisms or any more questions because I just don't know.
And I know it's not going to appeal to everyone, but I think you will like it eventually.
Here's what. We're going to play it some more. Maybe even if you don't mind, I'll take it home and try the single player. And
play it with me or Orion first before going solo.
Okay. Yeah, because I want to understand why this clicked with you guys so much.
Yeah. Orion, anything to add to my ranting here?
I don't know how well you're selling it, but it's a really fun game that I love, and for me, it's just this experience of it's hard to see exactly the point, like, other than leveling up, it's hard to see where you're becoming more powerful, but you inevitably are by acquiring these spells and acquiring these actions, and you just, eventually you feel, you're like, wow, I can just crush these enemies, which were so hard to deal with earlier on.
It almost sneaks up on you, because at the beginning, like fighting an orc, you have to make sure you have the right hand for attacking. At the end of the game, you could fight like a dozen orcs and probably do it fairly well.
Right, or multiple dragons or something.
But that accomplishment and that growing as a character and getting more abilities, it just gradually happens throughout the game and kind of sneaks up on you. And it's so satisfying at that end fight when you finally puzzle it out and are able to beat the enemies you need to beat to get the win. Anyway, that's Mage Knight. We will have more podcasts about Mage Knight in the future as we try to convince Matt that he should like this game.
Rage Knight.
All right. Finally, the number one game ever made, which I already posted on the website. It was the first review I posted. A magnificent, shining accomplishment of board game design, Twilight Struggle.
Another game that I think Mark and I like more than anyone else.
You've played it more than anyone else for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
I loved the 2 times I've played it. I just have never gotten back into it. And you guys are way better at it than I am at this point.
I'll spot you a few victory points if you want to play.
Yeah. No, I have mad respect for this game.
Yeah, I wrote about this a lot on the review on the site, but it's just the perfect thematic game. It's about the Cold War. It's kind of an area control game. Yeah, it's an area control game, but it's card driven, so it has all these Cold War events, and just perfectly thematic in that you're always trying to not lose instead of trying to win. You're trying to fight. You're trying to mitigate disasters instead of trying to advance. But ultimately, you do end up advancing your position, but it's just a very hard
It's hard
road.
to make that a selling point, but it might be one of the best thematic experiences in board gaming.
Almost all of these top 10 games are going to be, a lot of gamers aren't going to like, because these are the kinds of games I like. These very big, thematically coherent strategic games, but...
Yeah, but like the Cold War is something, it's almost abstract in a way of, I don't expect to feel the Cold War in a board game.
Oh, but you do.
But you do
so much.
In the first time you play it, you do.
Yeah, because there's always something bad happening, and you're trying to mitigate how bad it's going to be as best as possible. You're trying to... It's this very passive-aggressive struggle over influencing the different countries of the world. There's the DEFCON track, which is how close you are to nuclear war, and the game incentivizes you to get as close as possible to nuclear war constantly throughout the game without actually triggering it, because if you do trigger it, you lose.
Yeah, you're constantly playing the brinkmanship game.
Yeah, and you're constantly trying to second guess each other. You're trying to guess what cards that your opponent has, because scoring cards are implemented into the actual deck of cards you're playing with, so you never know when a particular region is going to be scored. So if you see your opponent start to build up in a given region, you might think, oh, that there finally is the scoring card for that region. And then maybe you go there and they think, oh, they're trying to protect their ground there. They must have the scoring card of that region. And then you both battle it out in Europe or whatever, and then you, at the end of the round, both of you look at each other like, oh, I thought you had the Europe card. This has happened to us, Orion. I remember on multiple occasions.
But sometimes you're trying to distract your opponent from another region where you want to score it, but you have to take care of these problem cards first, or something. So you could be playing into Asia, but actually be holding the Africa card and sweating bullets every action. You're like, oh, they're totally going to play decal right here and just destroy all my advantage. But you're trying to create crises for the other person faster than they create them for you.
So on your turn, Mark, what is the interesting decision that you're making? Kind of the tactical on your turn.
So on your turn, you're given, you have this hand of cards, and you're given basically a couple of options. You can spend the card for operations points, which lets you place influence or attempt a coup in an area, or you can play the card for the event, which is listed on there. And every card has a different event historically that does something. The big innovation of Twilight Struggle on this card-driven wargame genre is that when you play for their operations points, a card associated with your opponent. So if you're the US and you play a Russian event card for its points, the event also happens. So you could have a round in the game where you have a card a hand of cards almost entirely that are going to be your opponent's events. So not only are you trying to accomplish your goals in that round, you're trying to stop and mitigate the effect of your opponent's event cards, which you have to play.
Right, and every card you play is going to do something to hurt your position, and so you're figuring out, like, in what order do I play these to minimize the damage while responding to what the other person is doing.
And it also has both the strategic and the tactical, because you're trying to accomplish goals in, say, a particular region because you have the scoring card for that region, or you think your opponent does, or it's coming up soon.
You know it's coming within the next couple rounds at least.
Yeah, but you're at the same time, you want to establish influence all over the globe. So in the early game, Central America or South America doesn't really matter because the scoring card isn't in the early game, but you want to kind of establish a bit of a presence there in the early game just for the long view, just to get your feet in different places. So it's always an accomplishment in the game when you manage to successfully work your way into accomplishing something positive instead of just avoiding something negative. And that's the real appeal of the game, I think, is how tight and intense it is.
It really earns the title Struggle because that's what it is.
Yeah, just an absolutely brilliant game.
And comparing this to other war games or card-driven war games, just the design is so elegant because everything is just this tug of war on influence back and forth in these different regions, and then a tug of war on victory points. So everything is in terms of net victory points. You're not accumulating and trying to get to 200 points. It's, if someone gets 20 points ahead, they win instantly. So whenever you score a region, you both score points, but only the differential actually matters and moves the needle.
If this sounds interesting to you, read my written review because I talk a lot more about it there, but it's close. There are a lot of games in the top 5, 6 could have been in this number 1 spot, but I think for now, Twilight Struggle is still my favorite game of all time.
You guys have played this a fair amount, and to me, as I hear you talk about it and my limited experience with the game, it feels like an almost chess-like experience.
Yes.
Of it's this, one-on-one, incredibly balanced, kind of pushing the needle kind of game that the more you play, the more you understand it, the more
you know the cards, which is important.
Yeah, the more interesting kind of, I guess, meta kind of high-level strategy you have, what you know to push for, what you know to look for your opponent to push for, and sort of all those different things.
Yeah, and it adds to the bluffing of the game as well, because you know what cards your opponent might have, or your opponent has a particular card and you're trying to play around it, but they're not playing it, and you got to work with that. So as you play the game, it gets deeper and more strategic as you know the cards better. And in fact, there are entirely new schools of thoughts and strategies being developed right now for Twilight Struggle. I just read about this the other day. A group in China who've been playing high-level Twilight Struggle players who've been playing online a lot, who have their Chinese meta. Now that there's an online implementation you can get on Steam, they started moving up the rankings on the online game with this crazy strategy that is completely antithetical to the standard notions of strategy for the game. And now there are counters to that meta and different strategies that are emerging. So the game, even though it's 10 years old at this point, it's still developing as this very deeply strategic game, like you said, like chess. With different openings and different gambits and different combos you can try to pull off while still remaining very, very tight, on the margin. And there we go. That's my top 50 games of all time Please comment. Let me know what you think about the games. I did run a couple of statistics to see who the most represented designers and publishers are on my list. To no surprise, Vlaada Chvátil has 5 entries as the number 1 designer on the list. But in a close second, we have Corey Konieczka, who designed a lot of these Fantasy Flight games like Twilight Imperium, Descent, things like that. And then a bunch of designers who had 2 games on the list. So Vlaada still reigns supreme, although Ryan and I are getting a bunch of these GMT games, by Marc Herman or Volko Runke, so they might move up in the rankings in future lists because we're getting a lot of them. And Vlaada hasn't released a game since Codenames, and the next one he's releasing is an even lighter party game, so I don't know if that's going to make the list. Vlaada still is at the top, to no one's surprise, among the group. For publishers, GMT actually hits number 1 with 7 games on the top 50, and I'm completely not surprised by this. They're probably my favorite publisher just for not only the games they release, but like the customer focus they have, where they release these very extensive monthly newsletters and keep everyone up to date. It's still a very small business kind of operation that really love the people who play their games and vice versa. Fantasy Flight also has 7 games on the list, which is also to no surprise because they release a lot of these big epic games that I like.
They also do a lot of the thematic games, so
yeah.
All the Star Wars games that we have, I think, are theirs.
Yeah, coming in kind of a second tier, CGE has 4 games that are all Vlaada games.
Yeah, because of Vlaada.
Because of Vlaada, that's who he primarily publishes with. Rio Grande with 4 games, and Z-Man also with 4 games, kind of standard Eurogame publishers. So that's what hit the top of my list. I also looked at the average weight of these games, and the top 10 definitely had the heaviest games on there with a 3.37 average
Board Game Geek
on the Board Game Geek scale. The lightest games were apparently in lists number 40 through 31, and they had a 2.62 average. But I do enjoy the heavier games, and it shows there with some of these big epic games in the top 10. Any final thoughts on the list, guys?
No, that was fun. I mean, it'd be interesting. I haven't done the work to actually make my top 50, but I respect yours.
Largely, you respect it?
Yeah, I do.
Even with Rebellion at 41? Or did you forget about that?
Behind all the hubbub and everything, it's really just that you like War of the Rings so much more. I don't know that I would position them that much differently. They'd just be a lot closer.
So again, please comment below on what you think of the list. Don't forget to rate and review our podcast here on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. Check out the website at thethoughtfulgamer.com. A good number of these games that I've listed, I have reviews for that go into a lot more detail on the website. And hit me up on Twitter and Facebook. You can also get our podcast on YouTube if you search The Thoughtful Gamer there. I have a channel where I'm posting all the podcasts, and at some point in the future, we'll have some video content there. So if you're interested in that, please just subscribe to the YouTube channel. And that's it for now.
Definitely tweet us your thoughts on the list. I'd be interested to see what the biggest shocks or appalling game, what people think.
Yeah, on the top 10 at least, I think they're fairly well-respected games.
What do you think about Mage Knight? What do you think about
Mage Knight?
Give Marc some crap about that, because he deserves it.
Isn't it a top 10 game on BGG?
I think it is. I think of the top 10, Space Alert's probably
They're
the
wrong.
lowest on
Everyone
BGG.
else is wrong, Orion.
All right.
So that's the top games for now. We have our regular podcast running every other week, so we'll see that again next week. After that, I'm not quite sure what I'm going to do on the off weeks, but I will come up with something. It'll probably just be me talking to you guys by myself about something. That was not a good sales pitch. But anyways, we'll talk to you again next week. Goodbye.
Bye, everyone. Thanks for listening.